It was December 2019. I was sitting in the back of Dr. Riley's church, this new church I had just started going to. I was dressed in the attire of a homeless man when she came over to me and started prophesying to me. She told me that I was an oracle for God and that the devil was oppressing me and trying to steal my voice. I don't remember much after that. It's like I heard her, but I didn't hear her. It's like I was there, but yet I wasn't there at the same time. I was so depressed. I had on a big t-shirt, sweatpants, and a striped sweater jacket that didn't match anything that I had on, and it was so big, it looked like it was swallowing me whole. The thing that's so sad about it was the fact that I was dressed like that, and it was a Sunday. But since Pastor 𝐓𝐡𝐞, that man I was so crazy about, went off and married that Ruby girl, I didn't care one way or another about nothing, nobody, or anything. I didn't care about dressing up. I didn't care about makeup. I didn't care about making myself pretty no more. I just didn't care. After he got married, them first few days, all I could do was cry. Then them days of crying started turning into weeks and then weeks into months until I was so depressed that I was barely even combing my hair. It's like I was walking around in shock or something, like I couldn't believe that he did that. And when he did do it, it felt like I was in a boxing match with the devil and I had gotten a little too powerful, and in my pride, I told the devil, "You can't do nothing to knock me down. Hit me with your best shot." And then the devil laughed at me and said, "Oh, I got something for you right here." And then he used 𝐓𝐡𝐞 to cuck me upside my head, and like a Looney Tunes character, I was seeing stars and the referee was yelling, "KO!" My mama and my spiritual mama, who I call Evangelist, saw me slipping into doom, and they tried everything they could, from promising me a good night out on the town to us going to the movie theater, to the mall, shopping, or the A10 to get me that grilled teriyaki chicken and lo mein noodles I love so much. I mean, they tried anything to get me to come out of my room. But for many days, I didn't even move except to take a shower and eat. It felt like my heart had been ripped out of me, put back in me, only to be ripped out again. And nothing in my life made sense to me anymore. From God telling me to go back to his church, to that dream I had about us being together, to the sad dreams I had about him once I left the church, to the way I felt about him in my spirit, down to the very depths of my soul, none of it made sense, and I was out of it. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to think, what to believe anymore, who to believe anymore, who to trust. And when I saw them wedding pictures of that man and that girl, there were no words, just a lot of pain. It's a feeling that, if I'm being honest, I try to avoid any thought of it to this day, because honestly, even after 4 years, I still can't explain what really happened over there at that church between me and this man. And I really don't want to explain it. But unfortunately, just like with that brother episode that God made me do, this too is a part of my life that the Lord won't allow me to skip over. So I'ma try my best.
Mama, why he go and marry that girl like that?
It's okay, baby. God got somebody for you. You'll see.
Takyah, you are out of the will of God. You need to go back to the old church you came from.
Lord, if he's not for me, take it from me, please.
Tweety, who is that?
That's the one I was telling y'all about. He on fire.
Do you know his name?
His name is Pastor 𝐓𝐡𝐞.
𝐓𝐡𝐞? As I sat there wondering about this man who was up there glowing in the spirit, I couldn't stop looking at him. He was absolutely beautiful to me. If I'm being honest, I can't tell you one word that man said that night, because that's how much I was in a daze while looking at him. When he was done preaching, he did an altar call, except it wasn't the kind of altar call I was expecting.
How do I say this? There's somebody here with a gastrointestinal problem.
Oh my goodness. Lord, I know you didn't just tell this man about my stomach problems while I'm sitting right here in church. Really, Jesus? Now I'm over here looking cute with my winter boots on, a pretty gray shirt with tassels hanging off of them. My hairstyle is curly and it's hanging down my back like a bohemian curly suit. I got on my makeup and I look like I'm finna go audition to be America's Next Top Model. And you think I'm finna let these people and this fine pastor know that I got a stomach problem? No way, Lord. I am not going up there for no bowel movement miracle. So, Lord, I'ma just have to be stopped up tonight, okay? Because I ain't doing it. A few moments later, when nobody moved in the church, Pastor 𝐤𝐿's eyes went to me, and then he blushed and looked away. Then he started saying something like, it's okay if that's you. You don't have to be embarrassed. And y'all, this man would not move on from this. After a few more moments passed, I took a deep breath and I said, okay, Lord, here we go. And sarcastically, under my breath, I said to Jesus, thank you for helping me make a great first impression. When I walked up there, he smiled and blushed. I blushed too because I was embarrassed, okay? After he prayed for me, they told us to come back and visit. And I knew I would. I mean, as soon as me and my family walked through that front door, you couldn't feel nothing but the love of God and His presence. So I knew I would be back. And when I did, I walked straight up to him after church that Sunday and told him, thank you, Pastor 𝐤𝐿, for praying for me the other day. Because the night you prayed for me, yeah, God went to work. That's all I'ma say. He then laughed at me, and I laughed too. The next Sunday after that, I came back. Except this Sunday, I wasn't as happy as I had been. I just had a call with my publisher at Pulse. She wasn't too happy about all these contracts I was saying no to, and she especially hated the fact that I wasn't doing music with Uncle P anymore. Oh, I forgot to tell y'all about that. Let me insert that little story in here real quick. I loved Uncle P. Lord knows I do. But it was one day when we were sitting on the couch in his studio that I just started to look at him differently. We were talking about music, and I told him that I wanted to start rapping in some of my songs and that I wanted to do more soulful sounding stuff with a little rap in it every now and then because I was getting really good at it. He told me plainly I would not be rapping anytime soon. He said we're gonna keep doing music how we're doing it, and that was pretty much the end of the story. I said back to him, well, if you don't want to do it, then maybe I could write those kinds of songs with someone else. That man looked at me straight in the eye and said, ain't nobody gonna listen to you or your music without me. Now this was after I had been in church for some time, and right after I had let that engagement with Mez go, and we were learning about word curses and the power of the tongue. And I don't know, but that sure sounded like a word curse to me. And right underneath my breath, I rebuked every word of it. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the car with my mama getting me some honey gold wings. And while I was waiting on my mama to come from outside of the restaurant, the voice of the Lord came to me right there in that truck, and he said, Takyah, I am removing Paul from your life because of his pride. When my mama got in the car, I told her everything the Lord just said because I didn't understand it, but she didn't either. A couple weeks after that, me and my mom was at Uncle P's house, and we had a big show coming up. It was a few of the band members there, and I was about to head to rehearsal with them, I believe. My mama pulled Uncle P aside and asked him for $100 so he could help get me a dress for the show and a new lace front because she didn't get paid that week. Right after she asked him that man started raising his voice and saying how I'm costing him so much money and how I'm always needing something and this, that, and the third. And my anger was hot. Not only did you embarrass me and my mother, but you did it loudly, and you made sure that all these other white folks could hear you. And it made me feel like some polar black girl who couldn't do nothing or afford anything on her own, and I was boiling. But even though I was boiling hot angry, I didn't even say anything to him. I simply tapped my mother on her shoulder and told her, "Come on, Ma, let's go." I got in that car and slammed the passenger side door. While my mama was getting in the driver's seat ready to drive us back home, this man pulled on the car door, opened it up, and got on his knees and started begging me to take this $100 bill from him. I thought to myself, what in the world is going on here? And he didn't even get up from off that ground until I took the money from out of his hand. As I looked at him, I wasn't even mad no more. I just didn't like it. I didn't know what was going on with him at the time. All I knew was that I don't ever want nobody to get on their knees like that and beg me to do anything, because I ain't God. And secondly, it just didn't take all of that when my mama asked him to let us borrow $100 for me a new dress. So while he said all of that in front of my band members like that and behaved that way so they could hear it, man, that was just crazy. That whole moment just felt weird to me. The next weekend, I did that performance, and that was the last time Uncle P saw me. There were people who wanted to meet us, and I wouldn't come to Nashville. Uncle P heard about my publishing contract, and he texted me saying, "Hurry up and get your butt back up here, Money T, and get you an apartment. We got music to make." And I didn't even respond. About 6 to 7 months later, one of the guys who used to sing with me and Uncle P, let's just call him Derek. Well, Derek was from Memphis too, and he was bad to the bone and had a voice out of this world. And he told me straight up, "Man, you know that man tried to make me sing one of your songs at my shows?" He then said, and now he done found him another young black girl and trying to do music with her. When I asked him about what happened between the two of y'all, he said you done joined a cult and lost your mind and then gave all of your money away from your publishing deal to church. He said you wasn't none but a bad investment. When he got done talking, a part of me was angry, and then another part sad. I went home that night and thought, man, the first father figure I ever had said that about me. And here I was thinking that this man loved me like a daughter or a niece or something. But I see now that it was all just smoke and mirrors, I guess. I mean, I get it. I'm a realist. You invested $10,000 to $15,000 into me over the course of them 2 years, and you wanted a return on it. And that's understandable. I can understand the anger. I can understand the frustration behind that. But to try to have Derek and this other little black girl you found around Nashville singing my songs, the songs I wrote with tears, the songs I wrote in my anger and my grief and my depression, the songs I had to practically die for just so I could bleed them words out on paper, and you got folks around here singing my songs? Nah, that wasn't right. A couple years later, once I guess whatever he was trying to do with that other little black girl didn't work out, he reached out to my publisher and asked her about us doing music together again. It had been years since we'd talked. Although I wanted to see Uncle P again and know how he was doing, and his wife Rachel and little Daniel, when it came to us doing music together again, my answer was still no. If I'm being honest, I'm not even a person to hold grudges, so them little incidents, they didn't even really bother me that much. And for the most part, I still felt like he loved me. But the main reason I said no was because I just couldn't separate him from all them demons that used to torture me when I was doing music and living in Nashville. After my spirit got separated from my body, and my body was laying on the bed like an empty shell with my eyes wide open, and I saw that I was on my way to hell, y'all gotta understand, I was in shock for a long time. And even though I was healing from it and spending time with Jesus, I just wasn't the same after that. And because I couldn't separate him and the music we were doing from them evil spirits, I just couldn't go back. I didn't even feel like the music we were doing at the time was bad, but it was me with the music that was bad. And God saw it, and he knew I wasn't ready for all that, and he stopped it before I could lose myself completely. And he gave me another chance. And I'm sorry, but when no amount of money or fame or status worth my soul, And now I was experiencing lasting and true peace from God. And once I tasted that, and I wasn't drinking myself drunk no more, I wasn't seeing demons, they didn't have no power over me, and I wasn't trying to kill myself and balled up crying in a corner. I'm sorry, but I was free, and it wasn't no going back. Every time he sent me an email, I felt my eyes watering up like I was about to cry. I didn't even tell him why I left. I didn't think he would understand, so why bother talking? I was at the studio with the producer out in LA, and I was working on my song. Y'all know the one, Weed and Alcohol. I played this producer the idea I had for it, just like I did for y'all when I put it at the end of the last episode, and I told him I wanted us to record it over. Child, we never did record that song over. We just talked the whole session. But nevertheless, that's what we were gonna do that night when this older white man walked into our session. Earlier that day, my publisher Maggie told me to look good because she had somebody that she wanted me to meet. When he came into our session, the producer I was just talking to about my Weed and Alcohol song got up and left out to give us a few moments alone. When he shook my hands, he sat down on the couch, and I sat across from him, and immediately he went to talking. He was so enthusiastic. He was the head of a record company out in Europe, and he'd flown all this way just to see me. He told me how he could take my music to the next level and how I could start out in Europe and pick up Amy Winehouse's fan base, and everybody knew Amy Winehouse and Nina Simone was my favorite singers of all time. And it seemed like he was saying all the right words. But then he ended all that exciting news by telling me that the only way that this could happen is that I had to go back to Nashville and do music with Uncle P. I didn't even respond to him. When he finished talking, I simply got up, walked over to that computer, and pressed the space bar. And when I did, Weed and Alcohol started playing through the whole studio, and it was on blast. I wanted him to feel every word of what I had just wrote. I promise y'all I'm not exaggerating, but while it was playing, it felt like the presence of God filled that entire studio. I closed my eyes and I just let it play. When the song was over, I opened up my eyes and this older white man was bawling like a baby. And he started talking to me about how his son was bound to drugs and on the streets and how that song hit him so hard. After he told me all this, I told him I would be praying for his son. Before he left, he said, although I wish you were still doing music with Paul, after hearing that song, I don't know anymore. All I can say is keep going. He then shook my hand and he left. Now, I ain't even did nothing with that song, but I'll do something with this song, y'all, it's coming. Anywho, after this meeting, my publisher, she just didn't understand. And honestly, I didn't either. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to the way things were before. I had changed. Now back to this phone conversation. Maggie was so upset, but even in her frustrations, I could tell that she still believed in me. She was just sad that I had all these people trying to take me and Uncle P's music to the next level and I wasn't allowing them to. She told me plainly, Takyah, I'm just gonna say, you can be one of the greatest artists that ever lived, or you can be nothing, but the choice is up to you. And then she hung up. And that was Saturday night. So the following Sunday, I wasn't too happy. I felt like a failure, and I did wonder why God was taking me this route. Here I was, having the world presented to me on a silver platter, and it was doing something that I loved, singing. Yet, the way it was being offered to me, I just didn't want it. Was I crazy? Was I losing it? Maybe Uncle P was right. Maybe I was just a bad investment. Pastor Carol was up preaching, and I didn't even hear one word he was saying because I was so sad. When church was over, I didn't say anything to him, I just waved at him. I picked up my Bible and my purse, and I walked out the side door and left. Right when I got in the car with my mom, the Holy Spirit told me to go back and ask Pastor Carol to pray for me. I felt silly because he'd already done an altar call, and the crazy thing was he called for the depressed to come to the altar that morning and the sad to come up there, and I didn't budge. Once again, just like the last time, I knew he was talking about me, except this time I didn't move. I was too sad to do so. When I walked back in the church doors, he didn't even look surprised. It looked like he knew he was supposed to pray for me or something, and he was just there waiting. I kept my head down, and I nervously asked him, Pastor 𝐤, can you please pray for me? I didn't even tell him what was going on with me, and I didn't have to, because when that man opened his mouth, the Lord filled it, and I was crying like a baby. Everything I needed to hear, he said it. And in that moment, when my hands were in his hands, it felt like something I had never felt before. And this wasn't finna be no young fangirl getting caught up with no pastor type of story, because y'all gotta understand that by this time, I had already been in the Lord for 2.5 years strong now, and I had seen a many young, handsome preacher men, and 4 of them wanted to date me. One pastor in Memphis kept on trying, and even though he was extremely handsome and funny, I don't know, I just didn't let him pursue me for some reason. I didn't feel at peace with him. But this moment, it felt different. And when he was done praying, I opened up my eyes and stared at him. And for a few seconds, we just sat there looking back at each other, sitting in these church chairs. And I don't know how to explain it, but if I could, I would say that it reminded me of that Bible verse. You know, the one that talks about how Jonathan and David's soul was knit together in that moment, and how Jonathan loved his friend David as his own soul. That's how it felt for me. And honey, after that, you couldn't keep me away from that church. I was there every Sunday, happy and beaming with joy. And every Sunday I was laughing and staring at him. And he was staring at me too. And he would crack jokes over the pulpit sometimes, and then he would look at me to see if I was laughing. And I was. He was funny and kind. My spirit and my heart was rejoicing. This was truly one of the happiest times of my life, and I didn't want it to end. The end of the year came, and they were doing some event with a few of the churches, and even my old leaders were going to be there. When Pastor 𝐤 said that he had to speak, of course I was going there to support him, without question. If I'm not mistaken, I think this was the night before my birthday, and at midnight, while we were still at this event, my birthday had come, and I was now 23 years old. The night of this New Year's event, I was wearing this royal blue jumpsuit with my blue heels and chains wrapped around my waist, and I was so cute. When he got done preaching, they had refreshments in the back, and y'all know I'm a foodie. So I went right on over there to that table and grabbed me some snacks. When I turned around with this cup of lemonade to my mouth, 𝐤 was standing there behind me. We talked for a few moments, and he was blushing so hard. My, what is that? I wondered. We laughed and talked a bit more, and then he walked off. As he was walking off, my sister came right up to me and said, "You know that man like you." I said, "What?" and pretended like I didn't know what she was talking about. But in my heart, I already knew, because I liked him too. A few days later, I was in the kitchen making banana pudding and watching a football game when my phone buzzed. I knew it was somebody from Messenger because of the sound that it made. When I looked at my phone, it was Pastor 𝐤. We started talking about the game, and I told him I was making a victory banana pudding, but it looks like I was finna be making a try again next year banana pudding because the Cowboys was losing again. He laughed at me and then told me happy birthday because he forgot to tell me at the event the other night. He then asked if we could exchange numbers, and when he asked me that, I gave him my number, and for the rest of the night, I was bouncing around the kitchen, happy and on cloud 9. And for the next few months of my life, it was just like that. By this time, it was spring of 2017. I was now a manager at a fashion store called 𝐤𝐡𝐞 in Memphis, and honey, I was using them discounts like crazy to look good for that man. I mean, every cute outfit and jewelry set that came to my store, I would hurry up and hide it behind the counter just to make sure nobody got it. Then the following week, I would wear it to church. I don't know. It was just something about him that made me want to be my best self and grow even more in God than I already was. He was just so kind and gentle. Another trait I hadn't really seen on men growing up, so it wasn't that hard for me to like him. I was at my job one day, and it was the month of March, I believe. I had been praying and asking God for a few weeks, should I join the church? And I was waiting on a sign. Right there at the counter, while there were no customers in the store, I took advantage of that moment and I prayed, Lord, if you want me to join this church, then let my boss come in and say, Takyah, you're off work this Sunday. And Lord, if that happens, then I'll know that it's you and not me. And I promise you, I will join Pastor Kel's church this Sunday. 2 days prior, before praying this, my boss Tisha, who was a store manager, had already printed out the schedule for the week, and I was supposed to be working that Sunday. It was now Wednesday evening, and my boss hated working Sundays just like I did. So I knew that the only way that she was gonna ever come back and change the schedule again was if God had intervened. Another thing about it was, I didn't even ask to be off. I didn't hint at being off or nothing. I kept my mouth closed. I wanted to make sure 100% that this was God and that it wasn't me manipulating the situation or giving my boss a hint so she could let me be off and then I could have some sort of fake confirmation. Nope, it would all be God. I had just come from out of the break room from working, and I was getting ready to clock out and go home. And before I could even greet my manager to tell her hey, she said,
all right, Takyah, see you tomorrow, girl. Oh, by the way, last night I changed the schedule and you're off work this Sunday. I'm gonna go ahead and work it this week and you could just pick up the next one. Is that okay with you?
Y'all, I was so happy that I like to started shouting right there in that Kato's fashion store. I got in my car and zoomed home to tell my mama what had just happened. When we went to church that Sunday and Pastor asked, did anyone want to join? I jumped up out of my seat and smiled, and that man's smile was so big. He looked like a chess cat up there grinning so hard. But that's okay, because I was happy too. Then my Aunt Tweety jumped up right behind me and said, you ain't finna join before me. I'm joining too. And the whole church burst out laughing. I remember it like it was yesterday. After service, I told him a little bit about how I had prayed and asked for a sign, but I didn't tell him too much detail. All while I was talking, this man was smiling from ear to ear like he'd had a secret from God or something, and he was about to explode if he didn't let it out. That's how he was looking, and he seemed to be just as happy as I was for some reason. We texted a little bit more after that, and one night I asked him, did he know anyone who could help me with music, because I had so many ideas that I just had to get out of me. I just had to write a song with somebody. If you're a creator, then you know how it is. You just gotta have an outlet. And because I wasn't doing music with Uncle P anymore, and my publishing company wasn't really calling me anymore to meet new producers, I was stoked when he told me that one of his best friends did music. A few weeks after arranging this for me, I met up with his friend Bars and his wife at a little coffee shop, and after that, I was over his friend's house recording with them. We'd only been recording for about 10 minutes when I heard a knock at the door, and to my surprise, Kel walks in, and he had pizza. Child, me and his friend Bars ain't hit a lick of the snake that night. We just laughed and watched Dave Chappelle's stand-up comedy and ate pizza, and in the middle of us laughing, I told them to excuse me while I went to the ladies' room. When I was in the bathroom, I was looking in the mirror trying to fix my hair and making sure that I still look cute for this man. Y'all know how it is, girls. A little after this, we talked about college and music and how the two of them met and all kinds of stuff, and we was just vibing each other out. When it was time for me to go, I was looking for my shoes, and I couldn't find them anywhere. When I looked up from searching all over this apartment for them, Kel and Bars were laughing. And when I saw them laughing, I knew they were up to something. Then I looked at Pastor Kel and I said, Kel, where are my shoes? When I asked him this, he pulled them out from his little hiding spot, and I gave him a love tap right on his shoulder, and he and Bars was just cracking up. Oh, they thought this was so funny. As I started to head out the door, Kel told me to wait on Bars to put on his shoes so that the two of them could walk me to my car safely. I said to myself, okay then, these some real men right here. Okay then, brothers, all right, I'ma wait. We all went down the stairs, and once I made it to my car, I turned and gave Kel a church hug, and I got in my car, and I drove off. After that night, I figured Kel would be back over at the next session, so I hurried up and texted Bars to see when he would be available again. And when I did, he gave me a date. It would be Sunday after church, and I was counting down the days. That Sunday after church, I went out to eat with my family, and as I was about to pull off to head to Bars' house, someone who shall remain nameless got into that car and talked to me for almost 2 hours about how I was out of the will of God, how I needed to go back to my old church and submit, and how I needed to do this and that. For almost 2 whole hours, they did this outside of that restaurant that day. And while this was happening, it felt like a big cloud of confusion came in and sat on top of my head. I texted Bars and told him, "Hey Bars, I'm not able to make it this time." And I told him that I was sorry for canceling on him at the last minute. 10 seconds later, after texting him that, Kel texted me and said, "Why can't you come? Is everything okay?" I told him I was so confused. When I told him that, he said something like, "My mama always say just keep going and eventually things will line up and work out." It was something like that. I can't remember exactly what he said because it was so many years ago. After that day outside of the restaurant and being told I was outside of the will of God, someone else called me, and this person too shall also remain nameless. She said that she wanted to have a meeting with me, so I went to her house. When I got there, I couldn't even sit down good before she started bombarding me with questions. How was the church over there? How did I like it? Honestly, I was a little afraid to answer them questions, and even though I loved being at Kel's church and I didn't want to miss a day, I downplayed it because I was a little scared.
How is church over there?
Oh, it's cool.
Do you like it?
Yeah, everybody seemed cool to me.
Well, make sure you just be careful over there. That's all I got to say.
Oh, okay. I will. Now, I really didn't pay no attention to that. But when I started telling her about Pastor Kel and that he started liking me and things like that, her face frowned up and she said,
"You ain't gonna marry him. That is not your husband. No, ma'am."
When she said it, I felt horrible. And because she completely dismissed even the very notion of us being together and she frowned up her face like that, I didn't even bother with telling her that I was starting to like him too. I just remember leaving her house that day, and on my way back home, I was holding back so many tears. That following Saturday, we had rehearsal, and this was my first Sunday that I was going to be singing with Pastor and a couple more people on the praise team. And still, even though people had started confusing me, I couldn't shake how happy I was whenever I was there, so I went forward with it anyway. And that Saturday, I rehearsed with him. When we were done rehearsing, everybody left out one by one until it was just me and Kel left. I sat down in a chair right next to the platform and watched him. He was putting up these wooden panels on the back wall, and while he was doing this, I asked him a question. Pastor Kel, how do you know if someone is in the will of God for your life, or if they're the one?
Well, Takyah, you might not know who it is at first, but as long as you know who it's not, knowing that can help you out a whole lot.
That wasn't really the answer I was looking for. What I wanted him to do was tell me signs on how I could know or something so I could mentally check off this husband list in my head. Then I would know if he was the one or not. I stayed for about another 30 minutes, and we just talked about spiritual things that had happened to us, me seeing in the spiritual realm, and I even told him about that crazy event that happened to me at the club that night and how I ain't been back to a club since. We both laughed and talked and enjoyed each other's company. After a little more time passed, I figured I had been there long enough. I didn't want to distract him anymore from what he was doing, and I knew he was trying to finish this church wall by tomorrow. So I picked up my purse and I left. The next morning, when I walked into church, me and this man had on the same exact color baby blue. It was crazy. My mama said, the way y'all matched up, it looked like y'all went out and bought them outfits together at the same time. Make sure y'all take a picture together after church. Y'all look too cute. When church was over, before I could even talk to him or take a picture, I was snatched up by someone who was visiting. and they were still a part of my old church. They snatched me up, hugged me, and when they did, they whispered in my ear, "This is not the will of God. You just look so off up there singing up there with him. You don't belong here. This isn't where God wants you to be." And they gave me a look out of this world. I mean, it was a look of pure disgust. When I went home that day after church, I cried. I was so confused. None of this made sense. If I wasn't supposed to be here, why would God let me be off work that Sunday? If I wasn't supposed to be here, why would I be so happy and at peace here? If I wasn't supposed to be here, why was there such a pull and a tug on my spirit for this man, as well as helping him with this ministry? But that dang on loyalty to human beings and obeying them over God will mess you up every time. Just ask Saul. When I got done crying, I wiped the tears from my eyes and called Kel immediately. And I told him that I had to leave his church. When I told him that, he said, "What?" Then he paused. After a few moments of silence, he spoke again.
People don't belong to me.
Okay, Takyah. People don't belong to me. They belong to God. So do what you think is best. The next Sunday after that, I went back to my old church and submitted to them since I was being disobedient. And that was it. The crazy thing was, even though I had told him that I was leaving and all these other people were telling me that I shouldn't be there, it still wasn't enough to make me stay away from him. And I came to his church every Sunday that I could. During this time, this girl I grew up with and her mama Tip came over to the church, and after a while they joined themselves. The girl, let's just call her D, said that they'd already been here at this church before and God told them to come back to the church again. Now, I did think that that was a little strange when I first heard it. I had grown up with her, and I knew how her mother was, and how all the time when we were growing up together, she would try to compare her daughter to me or me to her daughter, and she would make us be in competition with each other. So them coming back over here all of a sudden was just strange to me. But my discernment wasn't as keen back then as it is now. And since D was someone who I loved since I was a little girl, and we used to be best friends and spend the night over each other's houses all the way from the ages of 4 up until middle school, I thought she really wanted to be my friend again. So when I saw her at Kel's church, she came up to me and talked to me. We exchanged numbers, and it felt just like the old times for a minute. I didn't have any friends at the time except for my 2 buddies in Ghana, so I was longing for that connection with somebody, and without even praying about it, I let her back in. Next thing I know, she was over my house and we were spending the night together and going out to restaurants and having fun, and I thought this girl truly loved me. Boy, wasn't I wrong. A few Sundays after us hanging out together, Pastor Kel announced that he would be getting ordained this week, and of course everybody was coming out to support him. When he announced that at church, me and Dee went back to my house that night, and she dropped 2 bombshells on me that were out of this world. The first one was that Kel was her husband, and the second one was that they had a date coming up in a couple weeks, and she made sure that she kept on telling me about it. The day before they had to go out, this girl even came to my job where I worked at and bought a dress from my store, and I sat there like a dummy and pretended to be happy for her. I even let her use my employee discount. I should have made her pay full price. When we got... That's what I should have did. Come out of this store remote. Shoot. Alright, let me get back to the story and stop playing. I should have made her pay full price. Shoot. Anyway, when we got back to my house that night, she just kept going on and on about how she knew he was the one, this, that, and the third. I got quiet and told her I was happy for her. I told her that I knew who my husband was too, and that he was a preacher too. I told her that because I felt stupid. And when she went out with him, I put my feelings for him on the back burner, and I respected the fact that she told me that this was her husband. To make a long story short, come to find out, She was already pregnant by another man and in love with him. A little while after I left Kale's church fully, she left too. And that other man, the one she really loved, is the one she married and the one she has 3 kids by now. And that is her husband to this day. Once her demonic purpose was complete, don't you know that that girl ain't ever called me again, and she stopped responding to my messages, and I was left there in confusion, bleeding, and in pain. I felt like I had just gotten tricked and hit by a bus all at the same time. Oh, Father God, help me with this episode. God, you got to help me with this mess. After I was manipulated into going back to my old church, I hated every moment of it. I was not treated fairly. Pot shots were thrown at me over the pulpit. And one Sunday, Apostle got up and said how this other person who was now leading worship had a much better heart than me. And that's why she was being exalted and ordained for this and that, and while I wasn't. Oh, I remember it all. Yet, even still, I didn't open up my mouth, and I still served them with no love from them, with no real support from them, with them trying to hold me back and yet gleefully propelling others. I stayed there and honored them. I mean, I literally did months of training and assignments for an intercessor's license that I did not get because my paper was a day late, yet others got theirs. To see other people being supported and loved on, yet it was a coldness and disdain when it came to me. To text my leader and ask her could I have a meeting with her because I needed to talk with her about something important, and she told me to text her secretary and ask her, and it was number 17 members in the whole church. What you mean a secretary? Yet all my other cousins who reached out to her, she never told them that. A year after being there, the Lord told me to launch a purity meeting, and He gave me a word to preach and showed me exactly how He wanted it done, and I immediately went into execution. When I told my leader about it, she had a meeting with me and told me I should have waited. She said I should have done it up under her and her ministry, but at that time I didn't care what she was talking about because I knew that this assignment was from God and I was going forward with it, with or without her support. The night of the event, she texted me and told me she was tired and that she really didn't feel like coming. I mean, she's texting me this right before I have to get up and speak to a room full of women. I shrugged my shoulders, put down my phone, and prayed. And after I got done praying, I went forward with my event, and we had a blast. When she arrived over an hour late to my event, on the way out the door, she held up another church member who had come out to support me, and she questioned her about my event. She asked her, how was it? And did she like it? And she was trying to figure out what we did there that night. I mean, it was just foolish. When I wrote my first book, Purity Over Passion, she didn't even ask about it. It was only $7, and she never even bought a copy. I brought a few copies to church one day, and other members bought them a copy right in front of her face, and when they did, she came over there, picked it up, looked at it, put it back down, and walked off. Amazingly, a couple Sundays after this though, she stood up in church and told one of the members that she would be giving her $100 to help start her business, yet she wouldn't even buy a $7 book from me. When she didn't buy a copy of my book, I drove over to her house one day just to give her one. And when I did, she didn't even open up her mouth to acknowledge me. Even now, it's hilarious seeing how they support other family members and people, and how they're always commenting up under everybody else's posts and loving on them, but they could never even like mine. It's funny because the very same people who mocked me and told me that I was a fool for even being there, the very same people who said they would never join her church, let alone visit, these are the people she supports loudly and boldly. And it was disgusting to me at first, but now I no longer care. It's just funny to see how they could be so vocal about others and so loud with their appreciation for everybody else but me. Yet I was the one member out of all of them who did the most for them, and I can say that boldly because I honored them people as unto God. I wouldn't even let nobody talk about them in my presence, and if you did, I'd be ready to cut off an ear for them, just like Peter did for Jesus. But they did not love me like I loved them, and realizing that hurt. In the past, before they closed their church doors and took a break, there were many times when I truly thought they loved me. I remember this woman and her husband sat up and did deliverance on me one Sunday for 2 hours in church, because that was around the time when I had just come out of the world, and because I was now fully submitted to God, all of them spirits had to leave, and they didn't leave that church until every demonic spirit was cast out of me. There were times when I would go over their house and spend the night with them, and I would just soak up every moment of it just because I loved being around them. That's why when I felt the relationship between me and them change, especially the relationship between me and Prophetess, who was my own blood cousin. When I felt that relationship go from a Naomi and a Ruth type of bond to a Saul and a David type of hate, I didn't understand it. But what I have learned is that some people are wonderful at loving you when you're small. They're wonderful at loving you when you're broken. But the healed you, the powerful you, the you that starts to walk in the glory of God you, oh no, now they got a problem with that, because now they see that you ain't so small like they thought you was. And another thing that I've learned is that some people cannot love you past the point of manipulation. But if you can only love someone when they're able to be up under your thumb, or you can only love them when you're able to micromanage their life and make decisions about their life for them, but the moment they put an end to it, you stop loving them, then I got news for you, sugar. That's not love. It's witchcraft. While I was in that church sitting in the very back, rotting almost every Sunday, my Aunt Tweety would call my mom sometimes, and she would ask us to come this Sunday or that Sunday because something was going on and she wanted us to be there for it. And when I heard them talking on the phone, I would be crying and begging my mama, please, mama, let's go. I was doing that because I wanted to see Kel again. And after all these months, it felt torturous to be away from him. One Sunday, as we were leaving church, my Aunt Tweety called my mama and said a prophet was supposed to be coming there and that we needed to be there. To my surprise, church actually let out early that day, and we were able to make it to Pastor Kel's service without missing much. When I got there, I just looked at him. After a few moments of hearing him speak, I was overwhelmed with sorrow. I couldn't even stay in that church. I jumped up, ran out of service, and went into the bathroom. When I closed the bathroom door, I fell to the floor and cried. In the middle of me crying, his older sister V walked in, and I don't know if she knew why I was crying, but I felt like she did. And she just held me and let me lay my head on her shoulder, and I cried right there in her arms. After about 5 minutes of me crying, she gave me some Kleenex. Once I wiped my eyes and tried to pull myself together, I went back into church. After service was over, my Aunt Tweety wanted the last few people that were there to take a picture together because she was feeling cute about herself that day, child, and she had on her church t-shirt repping the ministry. Kel was in the back working on something when she called him over there and told him she wanted him to be in the picture too. When he got up, he came over there and he stood right by me on my right side. When he did this, I could just feel his love for me beaming off of him. It felt like the pull of gravity. I mean, I could hardly stand being next to him because it was so strong. And at times, being around him would start to make me tremble. When my aunt posted that picture, I saved it, reposted on my own page, and I stared at that picture for weeks. A few days after this, I had 3 dreams back to back in the same month. In the first dream, I was driving a car in this dream, and I didn't know which way to go, so I made a left turn. But when I made that left turn instead of a right one, 1,000 cars got into a wreck, and they were piled on top of each other, and they kept slamming into each other one by one, hitting the back of another, all because I had made the wrong decision by turning left. The second dream I had, I was literally Prophet Jonah, and I was running away from where God had told me to go. But instead of a fish getting me, it was a witch, and she came up from out of the sea and swallowed me whole. Then the third dream, I was in 𝐲𝐿's bedroom and the door was locked. He picked up a box from off of his dresser and started to walk over to me with the box full of jewels and rubies and diamonds. It looked like a diary box from the Bible days or something. When he came over to me and tried to put the box into my hands, before he could put it into my hands, suddenly the box fell to my feet and these beautiful jewels went everywhere all over his room. And when I looked up to see his face, a tear fell out of his eye. And when this tear fell, another woman appeared on the other side of his bedroom door and was banging on it, trying to get in. And then I woke up. I didn't know what any of those dreams meant. And because I had no real support about this situation, I didn't even bother with telling my leaders about this because they'd already said that he wasn't my husband. So I just kept it to myself. I didn't tell 𝐲𝐿 about the other 3 dreams. But I did call him one day over the phone, and while we were talking, I told him about this other dream I had had about him looking sad on this couch with the wedding band on, and I told him that God was telling him to wait on him. I also told him about this other woman who I had seen at church trying to get close to him for her own reasons. Other than that, my mama was the only person I had ever told all of this stuff to. But she didn't say much because just like me, she didn't understand my dreams either. A couple of months later, my Aunt Tweety said they was having a Christmas party at the church coming up soon, and she asked my mama if I could cook something and come. I said yes without hesitation, and I made a big pan of spaghetti and some pound cake, and I was happy to be there. While we were eating dinner, 𝐲𝐿 and I literally sat at the opposite ends of this long dinner table, and I would sneak some glances in when he wasn't looking, and he would do the same to me when he thought I wasn't looking. But I saw him at the corner of my eye when my Aunt Jay, the same aunt who kicked them boys out of our apartment all them years ago, when she saw him looking at me like that, right at the dinner table, she burst out, "Girl, that man is in love with Takyah. He just keep on staring at her. I mean, every time I look up, his eyes on her and he's smiling. He need to just go tell her how he feels." I told her, "Aunt Jay, hush. He'll hear you, please," I begged her. Child, y'all know my Aunt Jay. She one of them aunts who gonna say whatever she feel at any given moment, and she don't care how you feel about it. And I don't know, but the way he smiled at me while I was trying to hush her up made me think that he heard her too. When he had finished eating, he left to go back into the sanctuary. Once he left, I went to the car to go and grab one of my Purity Over Passion books, and then I went into the church to give it to him. While he was doing something at the computer, I was trying to figure out what in the world would I write this man on the inside of his book cover. I couldn't think of anything. My fingers were literally shaking and I couldn't even grip the pen right. He didn't know this, but as I was writing, I was trying to hold back my tears once again. And the way I felt about him, what I was about to write on the front cover of his book was, "I like you. Do you like me too? And why did I leave your church? And do you feel God with me like I do when I get around you? And please ask me out on a date." But instead, I opted out for the less crazy thoughts and I wrote something sweet on the cover of the book before handing it to him. Then I left. A couple of months later, I was getting sick of being away from him. I had gotten to the point where I was really starting not to care what other people thought about it and what they told me. I started going back to Bible study nights at his church, and one day I told him that I had a show coming up and that I would love it if he and Bars would come out to it. A few weeks later, I was so happy. I just knew it was about to happen for us this time around. I would send him funny videos in the morning, and he would send me some back sometimes. I would crack jokes with him, and he would do the same with me, and for a few weeks, I was in pure bliss. Then one night, after I had a terrible dream, the Lord told me as clear as day, "Call 𝐲𝐿 and ask him to pray for you." I tried to shake it and I said, "No, I don't want to bother him. He's a pastor, Lord, and he probably already has too much going on and all these other things in his life. No, I don't want to bother him, da-da-da-da." But I kept feeling this strong tug about this, and I couldn't ignore it. I said, "Okay, Lord, dang, I'll call him." So I texted him, "Pastor 𝐲𝐿, please call me when you get free. I want to talk with you." And he said, "Okay." A few hours later, he called me. And when that man prayed for me, I returned the favor and I prayed for him too. And y'all, it felt like Jesus himself was about to step into my room. That's how strong that prayer was that day. I was laughing and clicking, and he was laughing and doing the same. And then after that, I sent him a worship song for him to listen to, and I told him, thank you so much for praying with me. At the end of this conversation, he asked me to be his accountability partner, and I was elated. I wanted him to be mine too. After I showered and put on my PJs, I went into the kitchen, and when I did, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it, and it was my mom. She was coming in late that night from my Aunt Tina's birthday dinner. Once I opened the door for her, I poured me a glass of cranberry juice and sat on the sofa. Before I could even tell her about me and Kel praying together, and how I was so in love with him, and how I knew that after tonight, he had to be the one for me. My mama opened up her mouth, and with the very next words she uttered, she crushed me.
You won't believe who I just saw out today.
Who, Mama?
Pastor Kel.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Mama, that's crazy. I just got off the phone with him.
And he had his little girlfriend with him, too.
What? When my mama uttered them words, I froze. Once she told me what she saw, I stopped talking to her. I left out of the living room to go to my room and close my bedroom door. That night, I cried myself to sleep. The next day, I texted him and told him, Pastor Kel, I need to talk with you about something. I can tell he already knew what it was because he was very slow on responding back to me. After a couple days passed, he gave me a day to call him, and I did. Honestly, I didn't care about nothing else that man was saying. The only thing I wanted to know was he going to marry her? That's the only thing I cared about. And once he said, yeah, probably. Once he said that, I told him okay, and I wished him well. Then, as time does, it went on. My grandmother died, and he even came and said a few words at her funeral. That whole day was a blur to me, because y'all already know about me and my grandmother's relationship and all them years that I was angry with her until I realized that she didn't know. So I was sad when she died. And when I saw Kel there, I saw him, but I didn't see him. My mind wasn't really on him at that time. And when he was standing in the preacher's line after the funeral, I didn't even say hey to him. A little more time went by, and 9 months later, I was so fed up with all these people and their voices in my ear that I told my friend, Stevie, I'm coming back to Africa. I need to get away from Memphis for a while. I took a whole work check and bought me a ticket to Ghana. And the first morning that I was in that Airbnb, the Lord said as clear as day, go back. And when he told me where to go, it was Kel's church. I said, Lord, what? But I thought you wanted me to leave. I thought I was outside of your will being there. And he said, Takyah, I never told you to leave. Now go back and do my will. And I said, okay, Lord, I will. When I got done spending 3 weeks in Africa, I went back to my old church and told Prophetess I needed to have a meeting with her immediately. She scheduled a date for us and told me to meet her at Panera. Once we sat down in Panera, I told her I was leaving the ministry. And right after our meeting, I left the ministry. And the following weekend, I spent the night with Kel's mom. And that's something else I forgot to tell y'all about. Me and his mom are real good friends, and she's like a mother to me. Years ago, when I was going through all that terrible stuff and that confusion, she asked me to have dinner with her one day. We met at Piccadilly's. I bought her a bouquet of flowers, and we laughed and talked and had a good time like we had been friends for years. And from that moment on, it felt like a Naomi and Ruth type of relationship, like we was just knit together. And even when I asked her about it, she said, honey, that's just cause we kindred spirits, that's all. That's why the relationship flow like it do. And even that was strange. The fact that I loved his mother the way I did, the fact that we're still close even to this day, I mean, none of it made sense. Anywho, let me get back to this story. I was over her house, and we were laughing and watching a movie. Right in the middle of the movie, the front door opened, and it was Kel. My heart froze with nervousness. I didn't even know he was coming over here, but I was a little let down. He just said hey, and then he went upstairs to go to sleep. The next morning, when I was downstairs sitting at the kitchen table, I was on the phone with my friend Stevie when Kel walked in. It was Sunday, and because I was back at his church now, all of us were getting ready for that morning service. He pulled out the iron board, and when he did, he told me good morning, and I told him good morning too. He then continued to iron his shirt. Now y'all should know by now that I'm an old 60-year-old woman at heart. So I was gonna tell him, Kel, go do something else. I'll iron your church clothes for you. But I was so nervous that I couldn't say much of anything to him. And because he had a girlfriend, I didn't want to overstep my boundaries either. So I just sat there and looked at him. My friend Stevie heard my voice and how high-pitched it got when I told him good morning. And he said, ew, Kaya, why did your voice change like that? And then he said, if you love him and feel that way about him, he's right there. Just tell him. I whispered back to him and said, I can't do that. And ain't the man supposed to say something to the woman first? And what if he doesn't feel the same way that I do? And then I said, no, he's about to preach. And I don't even want to put nothing like that on his mind to disturb him before his sermon. I can't do that. Stevie said, Kaya, I don't understand you. If you like someone, you should tell them. Then, if they don't feel the same way about you, hey, there'll be other people. But at least you will know. But he's not married now. So if you do like him, now would be the perfect time to tell him, Kaya. When he saw that I wasn't budging and that I still didn't say anything to him, he shouted through the phone, if you don't tell him that you like him, I will. Give him the phone. I said no. And then I told him immediately, I'm going to call you back. And then I hurried to hang up the phone before Pastor Kel overheard him. When we went to church that Sunday, Kel announced that I was joining the church again, and I felt happy. A few weeks after that, I was in prayer, and the Lord told me to post a prayer for my future husband on social media, and of course I obeyed him. After I posted my husband prayer so other women could hear it and pray along for their husbands too, I then put on a cute outfit and headed to Bible study. When I got there, to my surprise, his girlfriend was there for the first time, but I didn't care. Even if they weren't married, I still respected people's relationships. So when I saw her, I said hey to her, and then I went and sat down. In Bible study, I noticed that Kel was so nervous, and it looked like he had just been crying or something, and he just didn't seem like himself. He was shaking during Bible study, and it was just strange to me. When Prophet, let's just call him Prophet Samuel, because baby, to this day, not one word that man then ever told me or anybody else I know then fell to the ground. He is a true man of God and one that walks closely with the Lord. Anywho, Prophet Samuel got to prophesying, and he prophesied to a few people that night. When Kel thought he was done, he came up and tried to grab the mic from him, and right when he tried to grab the mic from him, he said, oh, I can't forget you, Pastor. And then he started lighting into him and prophesying to him. One of the things he said was that he was free and that he did not have to go the way that he was going. And God told him to tell Kel, I got your back, son. He also prayed against confusion and demonic chatter in his ear. And in the midst of this prophecy, he put a prayer cloak over his head and covered him. And he continued to prophesy to him. All while he was doing this, I was happy for him. I wasn't sure exactly what he was talking about, but I was happy to see Kel cry and be free and be happy himself. That's all I cared about. So I was jumping and shouting, yes, God, do it for him. Hallelujah, amen. But when I started to listen closely, I got real quiet because to my surprise, the very same things I had just said in my prayer that morning for my spouse, I mean the very video I recorded and posted right before I came to church, was matching Kel's prophecy almost down to the T. In the midst of the prophet talking to him, his girlfriend started screaming and hollering and she fell out on the floor. I said to myself, what on earth is going on here? When I looked back over at Kel, his little sister, who was friends with this girl, was over there, and just like his girlfriend was crying, she was on her knees and crying too. When Prophet Samuel got done telling him how he was free and to get this demonic chatter out of his ear and how God had his back and how he could walk away, I was starting to understand exactly why she was falling out on the floor like she did. When church service was over, this girl was still laying on the floor crying and sobbing. I thought to myself, you know what? Let me just move on from here and keep them thoughts to myself. Not gonna give the enemy no room. Anyway, time went on, and this guy from Facebook reached out to me. He sent me a cash app for my birthday, and I didn't even know him. I told him that was sweet, and then after I told him thank you, he asked for my cell number, and I gave it to him. I wasn't talking to nobody. He called me, and we talked that night. The next morning, when I was cleaning up, he called me again. It was pretty early, so I thought it was kind of strange, but since I was up, I answered anyway. When I answered the phone, he didn't even let me speak before he started telling me what God had told him that morning. He said that he was in his bed asleep, and God shook him up at 6 o'clock this morning and told him, "Leave my daughter alone." After telling me this, I told him okay. Then I went on by my business. 2 months later, 𝐲𝐿 got sick and almost died. I was praying and calling out his name to the Lord just like everybody else was. I didn't miss a day praying for that man. When they said he was getting better and that he would be flying back home soon, I was excited. I told him I would finally make that banana pudding for him and that I wanted to see him when he got back. 2 days after I text Pastor 𝐲𝐿 that same man who told me that God told him to leave me alone came back around and said God had changed his mind. Now, I had a raised eyebrow, but back then, once again, I was so naive and too trusting. And on top of that, I was also sad and vulnerable. So it was easy for me to be manipulated. We talked for a couple weeks, and then he came to visit me. When he was in town, he wanted to go to church with me. Now, the Sunday he came into town just so happened to be Pastor 𝐲𝐿's first Sunday being back after being in the hospital, so I was a little nervous. But at the same time, I said, he got a girlfriend, so what I do shouldn't even matter. We arrived at church late and sat in the back of the service. When I saw 𝐲𝐿, my heart dropped. He was much smaller than he was before he left. I hadn't seen him in almost 2 months, and I could tell he had been sick and was still healing. Although I was happy to see him, I was also kind of sad that I brought this man to church with me now. But at the same time, his girlfriend was there, so if he needed to be consoled, he had her. He didn't need me. When service was over, they had refreshments in this room in the back, and I went in and got some lemonade. When I was coming out of that room, 𝐲𝐿 touched me on my elbow and said, "Takyah, that's you?" When he asked me that, I wanted to tell him, why does it matter? You bringing your girl up in here in front of my face and moving on with your life, so I'ma do the same. I guess now you see how I feel, huh? Instead of saying what I really wanted to say, I didn't say nothing. It felt like my mouth was mute. When I didn't say anything to him, he shook his head and said, okay. And then he smiled at me. But it wasn't the kind of smile you'd want to see. It was more like a, I'm finna get you back and I got something for that kind of smile. And I could see his anger behind his eyes even when he smiled at me. But even though I saw this and I felt this in my heart, that meant nothing to me. Because until you open up your mouth and tell me how you feel about me, there is nothing that I can do. As a woman, that's just how my mama raised me. We don't chase after men. So even though I saw it and I felt it, I didn't care, because he didn't. And if he could ignore the feeling he had in his heart for me, then guess what? I was gonna follow suit and do the same. After he said okay and smiled at me like that, I shrugged my shoulders and walked off. A month later, I was scrolling on Facebook, and lo and behold, 𝐲𝐿 was on one knee proposing to his girlfriend. I was beyond crushed. But even in my crushing, I said to myself, well, if she makes him happy, then I wish nothing for the best for him. Because that's what you do when you really care for somebody. It's not boastful, it's not loud, it's not self-seeking, it's not manipulative. Real love is not like that. And if my heartbreak was worth his happiness, then I will be okay. Now, of course I got a little nosy. And when I saw he was engaged, I started to scroll through her page. Ladies, you know how we do. But when I did, I saw something his girlfriend had posted a couple months back, and it was a little while after I posted my husband prayer. She said something like, women pray for their future husbands, and there's nothing wrong with that, but yet they're living in poverty, have dead dreams and dead careers. Believe for something else, sis. It was something of that nature, and I knew it was for me. Whether people want to lie and say it was or not, I knew it was for me. Now on top of this, I had already been seeing a few things and noticing some pot shots and foolishness that was already going on within the church. So when I saw that pretty much topped it off for me. So I sent him an email about it. Honestly, I didn't want anything or to even bother him. I truly just wanted to know that after this change in his life that I would be treated fairly at the church if I decided to stay. I had already been scarred by the last ministry I went to, and I just didn't want this to happen again. And for the past couple of months for me, it was starting to feel a little bit like that with me and a couple members. But sending him that email, that was one of the worst mistakes I ever made in my life. And that was the last email I ever sent to anybody like that. A couple days later, everybody on Facebook, men and women alike, were talking about how the witch don't want him to move on, how he and his girlfriend are so happy, and how I need to find my own man. They then started posting about how I don't want him to heal, and their statuses were flying off the roof and getting updated, it seemed like, every day about that situation. I literally had friends of hers try to send me a friend request on Facebook. It was utter foolishness. And throughout all of this, I didn't say anything, even though it was lies. I just sat there and I cried through it all, and I suffered. I was devastated, and I just wanted to get away from it all. One day, I ended up taking a trip to Mississippi to visit my boyfriend, and the next day, when he started kissing me, that was it. I would usually tell him to stop, or okay, or all right now, that's enough. But this time, I didn't, and I lost my celibacy to him. And in that hotel, I cried like a baby. 6 years of abstinence gone down the drain for 2 minutes that I can't even remember to this day. It's like God took the feeling away. He didn't even let me feel nothing. And yet my 6 years of abstinence was snatched from me. 7 days later, this man came to Memphis and proposed to me. The crazy thing was, he didn't even ask my mama for my hand in marriage, how a man's supposed to do. But I knew why he didn't. He'd already knew that she would have told him no because she didn't care for him anyway. She said that he reminded her too much of my daddy and that he had a lot of stuff he needed to work on before he even tried to get a wife, and especially a wife like me. She was saying, baby girl, you covering him, you praying for him, you pouring into him, you doing all this, buying gifts, all this other stuff for him, and it's not mutual. And she was not pleased. Once he proposed to me, I said yes. And when I said it, I felt nothing. Not a spark, not happiness, nothing. I was just so angry at Kel. And honestly, I just wanted to prove to him that I could do it too, just like he could. When he put that ring on my finger, I hurried up and went outside and took some pictures with him. And I posted them pictures immediately. When I did, a few hours later, Kel commented, I see you got that ring. When he commented that, I said back to him, yep. I knew he was angry. But once again, I didn't care. If he was finna marry her, then I was finna marry him. Y'all, that was so foolish. And all I can say is thank you, Lord, for stopping me again from a terrible marriage. Anyway, a few days later after he proposed to me, we went to church together again, except this time I had on my engagement ring and I made sure to show it. Kel did okay the first time that I brought him to church a couple months ago back in April, but this time, in July, he couldn't hide it. He was so not himself and so nervous that it looked like he was shaking like a leaf. It was like he couldn't even concentrate. He then came over there and touched the both of us and said, God bless this couple. And he tried to say a few more words, but it's like his words was getting mixed up and he wasn't making no kind of sense. After service that day, I remember staring at him and he just sat down and looked defeated, like a whole yellow school bus had ran into him. And in my anger, I said, good. Now you know how it feels, don't you? Whew. Y'all, I was so foolish back then. Not me finna mess up my whole life just to hurt the man I actually cared about and get back at him with this new man. Lord Jesus, I thank you for deliverance. Needless to say, 7 days after that man proposed to me, the voice of the Lord came to me loudly and he said, you will not marry him. And the same day God said that, Don't y'all know that this man was arrested, and then a month and a half after that, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. When I found this out, I deleted them pictures of us off of social media immediately. I was so embarrassed that I even skipped a few Sundays at church. But one day, I was feeling so down that I knew I needed to go to church and be prayed for. So I went, and when I did, they started saying stuff about a Jezebel spirit and praying against it, and I knew they were talking about me, and it was just utter foolishness to me. I mean, Jezebel. Really? Takyah? Do you know what a Jezebel spirit is? A Jezebel spirit is someone who has a spirit of seduction. It's a spirit that literally hates God. She cannot even stay in the presence of God. It's a spirit that drains strong men and women of God of their anointing, to one day, after dealing with this spirit for so long, you will look in the mirror and not even be able to recognize yourself. This is a spirit that rids the atmosphere of the glory of God, and any real prophets who can see that spirit and call it out of her, she hates him. Anybody who doesn't agree with this spirit or does things the way that it wants it to go, this spirit then sets out to destroy them. She also gets other prophets and people who will agree with her, and she surrounds herself with them, and anything that's connected to the true and living God, she hates it. It's a spirit that does not stop until people's destinies and lives are utterly destroyed. It's a spirit that uses seduction and emotional witchcraft to get in, and then once it gets in, this spirit then uses manipulation and intimidation to get its way. And the desire of a Jezebel spirit is to control people and everything around her, and that desire to control is insatiable. Yet it's a spirit that never practices self-control over its own body or over its own spirit. Jezebel is a spirit that thrives in areas where leadership is afraid and weak. The Bible also says in Revelation chapter 2, verse 21, I have given her, Jezebel, time to repent of her immorality, but she is unwilling. So Jezebel is a spirit that is unwilling to change. It will not bend, it will not bow, but it knows how to make others bend and bow. And if you are a person who is afraid of confrontation, it feeds on you. It's also a spirit that's so cunningly deceptive that it knows how to operate through others and make them think that the very decisions that they are making are all on their own. It's a spirit that is a grand manipulator, and it's a spirit that is never satisfied. I was reading my Bible one night, and right in the middle of my studies on the Jezebel spirit a little over a year ago, the Lord said to me, Takyah, there are two things that are never satisfied: the belly of hell and a Jezebel. So me, being a Jezebel spirit? Nah, that's not me, Doc. Now, a spirit of anger or getting smart and popping off at the mouth when people continue to try to poke at me and I finally react, yeah, that's happened sometimes. But a Jezebel? That's laughable. Anywho, back to the story. Right there in that service, the Lord said, Takyah, your time is up. And that was it. A month after this, it was September now, and I went to sleep and had a dream one night. And when I did, I dreamed me and Kel was on the beach, and it was so much glory and peace. There were angels of the Lord flying all around us. But then, as the angels were all around us and the sun was beaming, the sun started to set on us. When the sun started setting, 30 people came out of this dock, it looked like, and they were yelling his name. Kel! And they said it over and over again. Get over here, now! It was crazy because when they called him, he looked like he really didn't want to go. He then turned to me and said, Takyah, I gotta go now. And I said back to him, I know. And then I told him bye, and he walked away from me. When I woke up, I just cried. And then 2 months later, he was married. And that was it. The crazy thing was, you would have thought that after that, people would have been happy and moved on with their lives. They'd finally gotten what they wanted. They'd finally gotten what they pushed for. But still, it wasn't enough. Now, after getting married, these people wanted me to stop being friends with this mama, and they started posting up all of this nonsense about how an ex still hangs around the mother and how her being around can mess up his marriage, as if I was coming around him. I mean, it was just crazy to me. First of all, I didn't even come around him or the church anymore. Second of all, after he got married, I was the one who unfriended him and made him unfollow me on every platform. I mean, I even unfriended that man on the Bible app. I didn't want any connection with him. And although I still loved him, I loved God more. And when he married her, I let it go. And thirdly, if I was using his mama, don't you know that I would have been stopped being friends with her and been stopped talking to her once he got married? Because if that was the foundation of our relationship, then once he got married, there would be no purpose for her to be in my life anymore. But our relationship wasn't built on that. It was built on true love and friendship. And don't you know that we done been friends for almost 6 years, and me and that woman ain't ever talked about her son or his wife once. When we get together, it ain't none but pure love, and we have a good time, and we enjoy each other's company. That's it. No ulterior motives necessary. She is a woman of honor, and so am I. But even if you don't believe that about me, then believe it about her. Anyway, after Kel got married, I was literally trying to fast track myself to heal and get over the whole situation. But y'all, healing doesn't work like that. You can think you're okay. You can even be sure in your heart that you're completely healed. And then one day, you can have a memory about this person, a memory about their death, a memory about this heartbreak, and you'll start crying all over again, even though you're trying to heal. And regardless of how the body of Christ tries to slap a Bible verse on top of an open wound and say, just pray about it, or she needs to be over it by now, and they expect people to be over stuff immediately and heal on their time clock, healing doesn't work like that. It's more complex than that. And quite frankly, healing, real healing, is messy. But nevertheless, as long as you're a person who's actively trying to heal, God will be your balm, and He will aid your open wounds. And back then, that's what He was trying to do, and that's what I was trying to do. But while I was trying to heal, it felt like people kept picking at the scab of my wound. One day, someone in his family posted, "You might have the mother-in-law, but you don't have the man. Booyah!" But I didn't say nothing. I just left it alone. But just because I ignored it and didn't say none doesn't mean that I wasn't still angry. After seeing it, I said, you know what? God, I'm done with all this mess. And I typed up a long text to send to Kel's mother saying on how I had to let her go, how we couldn't be friends anymore, and how I didn't want to mess up Kel's marriage by us still hanging out together, even though we only hung out together a few times in the year. But right before I hit send, the Lord said, "What are you doing?" I responded back in frustration, "God, I'm sick of these folks constantly talking about me, and you ain't let me clap back not once, so I'm finna do what they want me to do and let her go." And God said, "You will do nothing of the sort. She loves you, and just like you need a friend, she needs one too. Delete your message and ignore them." And I did, and I was doing good until one day, I got so fed up with people trying to blame me for their own problems that I wrote a nice little blog for all of them to see. And my hands were typing in anger. When I was finished writing it, I pressed post, and that blog was now up on Facebook. The next morning, I got up and put my clothes on for church and headed straight to Dr. Riley's. As soon as I got there, it was glory, and the praise team was singing my favorite gospel song of all time, "Bow Down and Worship Him." And when they started singing that song, I knew it was God calling me. When I put my Bible down on the chair, I ran down to the altar, fell to my knees, and I wept. As I was crying, I looked up, and the Lord appeared to me in a vision right there, and he said, "Takyah, your hands have been clean. Now keep them that way." And then the blood of Jesus washed over my hands, and then the vision closed up. When I got home, I deleted the blog. But I was sure that they'd already seen it because it had been up there all night and morning. And if they did read it, then that meant that the damage was already done. I asked the Lord, "Lord, what should I do?" Once he told me to get some cards and write an apology to all of them, I did it without hesitation. My spiritual mama had to preach that weekend at Kale's church, and it was perfect timing. I sent his mother and a couple of other ladies gifts for Mother's Day along with them apology cards for them other women. And that was it. After that day, I turned my back away from it permanently, and I kept my eyes on the Lord. Then, a little while after this, I had a dream. I was laying in bed, and a dove came and woke me up and made me follow him. He led me to this white veil, and when he pulled this veil back, it was this big tree that looked like it could have been the tree of life itself, and it was doves flying all around it and all within the branches of this big tree. It was hundreds of doves, and the sun was shining down on it so brightly. When I woke up, the Lord said, "California." Now I had no job, no clue how the crap I was gonna get there, but I know one thing: I refuse to stay here. I refuse to let the situation define me. I refuse to let all these folks keep calling me stuff that I'm not. I refuse to become like the people in the ghetto that I'd always seen and known. I refuse mediocrity, and most importantly, I refuse to die in Memphis, literally and figuratively speaking. After God showed me this, along with 100 other signs, I started saving every penny I got from anywhere. And every time I got some money, it either went on a piece of furniture or a decoration for my new apartment. I didn't even have an apartment yet. I was just moving by faith and trying my best to obey God. I went to Walmart and got 50 boxes. And like a mad woman, I started packing up everything in my room. My mama came in my room one night and asked me, "What are you doing?" I told her, "I'm getting out of here." And when I told her that, she just looked at me funny and said, "Okay." A few months later, everything in my room was now boxed up, and I was literally rewashing the same outfits over and over again just so I could have something to wear because most of my clothes were already in boxes. On December 2nd, 2021, the Lord said, "If you do not leave Memphis before the year's out, you will be out of my will." I got nervous and said, "But Lord, I don't have a job. All I have is $1,000. I don't even have a place to go. I haven't even been approved for an apartment yet or anything." But in the midst of my questions, I still obeyed. I bought me a one-way ticket to LA, and when I did that, my mama said, "I'm coming with you to make sure you're gonna be all right." And she got her one too. The next day, on December 3rd, after buying those 2 plane tickets, a woman called me and said she had a check on her desk that belonged to me. All she needed was an address so she could send it off. When I asked her how much was the check for, she told me the check was for $7,700. Double 7, double for my trouble. And how God let all of this work out for me, and how we were even flying out of Memphis on December the 7th. That's that 7 again. Completion. Oh, I knew this was him. When I got on that plane, as I looked out the window to Memphis, I started to remember the pain from my childhood, the memories, the anger, all the sorrow this city and the people in it have brought me, all the sorrow I brought to myself with my own choices. And in that moment, when I looked out that airplane window, I knew I would never come back here to live again. As the plane took off, I stared at the clouds in the sky, and I began to cry. For the first time since Kale got married to that woman, I actually felt happy again. I felt at peace. I felt joy. And I wasn't crying because I was hurting. I was crying because I realized, just like my apostles say at the ministry that I'm a part of now, he says, your life is just beginning. Right there on that plane, I realized that, Takyah, your life, it isn't ending, baby girl. It's just beginning. Thank you for listening to the Godly Chick podcast. Tune in next Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear the continuation of Takyah's journey as well as her testimony. Don't forget to follow Godly Chick Ministries on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Godly Chick. That's GODLYCHIK. And always remember, when you know who's you walking with, it ain't hard to be a godly chick. Have a blessed day, and I look forward to having you all here with me again next week. Try to repent for my innocence.